Hello and welcome to the Cambridge Union for tonight's monarchy debate. For those of you who have not been before, the rules of the debate are simple. 3 speakers will speak for the proposition and the opposition, each giving an 8-minute speech in turn. We will hear from 1 proposition and then 1 opposition. Then, something very special happens. There will be a round of floor speeches, allowing you, the members, to make a brief speech in proposition, opposition, or still better, in abstention of the motion. If you don't feel like giving a proper speech, but feel so outraged with an argument that you've heard tonight that you wish to interject, please raise your hand and say during somebody else's speech on that point or point of information or something similar. If you're accepted, please wait for a microphone to reach you, state your name and college, and then let rip. But please keep your comments brief. And please don't intervene in the first or in the last minute of a speaker. The best and the second best floor speeches will receive prizes. The prizes are a group escape from a locked room with lockhouse games, or a group walking tour of Cambridge in case any of you feel you don't know the city well. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first speaker tonight, Darren Grimes. Darren Grimes is a British political commentator and activist. He is currently the digital manager for the Institute of Economic Affairs. He previously worked as a deputy editor for the website Brexit Central, founded by Matthew Elliott, the former chief executive of Vote Leave. He was listed in the LBC's top 100 most influential conservatives of 2019. He was fined and then unfined £20,000 for not being guilty of electoral malpractice. Darren, the floor is yours. You can just speak from there.
I can speak here. Thank you very much for that introduction and that important distinction. I must warn the House, in about 5 minutes, I am going to start spluttering like Theresa May did in that infamous conference speech, but I would like to warn you that it is the common cold and not coronavirus. Now, I'm sure that there are many of you on both sides of the House today that feel in this age of modernity and technological revolution that royal families can feel like anachronisms at best and colossal wastes of money at worst. And even as a staunch monarchist myself, despite being on this side of the argument, I recognise that you can pick up a newspaper on any given day and be met by the unedifying spectacle that paints the royal family as being less like Netflix's The Crown and more like Channel 4's The Windsors. But, Mr. President, we're not here to debate the institution of monarchy. That has been done in this House many times before. The motion that we're proposing tonight is that in accepting that we have a royal family, how do we think they should behave? If you could clone Her Majesty the Queen, a woman who has devoted her entire life to service and duty, despite being the most privileged person in the land, and apparently free of ego as well, I'd advocate that you do just that. So, as a kid, I could never understand why my nana, who's never been to London, by the way, never mind Buckingham Palace, collected royal commemorative plates. She had this enormous chest of these plates. And I just used to look up at them and think, who are these old people on these plates? And it wasn't until I was a bit older that I could grasp that for her and for communities like that, which I grew up in County Durham, the Queen has provided a comforting, non-political presence throughout immense and often unsettling change in this country. And there's absolutely no way in my mind that a succession of Republican presidents, probably failed politicians kicked upstairs, by the way, could have done the same. Imagine Presidents Wilson, Presidents Major, or Presidents Blair on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. Well, Mr. President, it's enough to make me want to turn to the bottle. Now, notwithstanding the inspiring personal conduct of the Queen, her model leadership has clearly not been emulated by the rest of the family. Her successors, well, haven't been all that successful. When the whole point of the institution is to provide continuity to the next generation, the fact that many of those in the line of succession are met with severe trepidation and are often divisive characters, it can hardly leave you to believe that the firm is a success story. Only this week, it was revealed that Prince Andrew had provided zero cooperation, zilch, nada, with the Americans over the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The prosecutor in charge of the investigation told the BBC that despite the fact the Duke himself had told Emily Maitlis in that interview with BBC Newsnight, which, by the way, I had to watch through the cracks in my hands, it was so cringeworthy, it was utterly bizarre, and I'm sure that the whole House will agree that it was dripping with arrogance and not enough shame, nowhere near enough shame. It was suggested by the Secretary of State, who was in London today, that they could perhaps do a swap with Anne Secoulis, and I would thoroughly endorse that view. The Daily Mail then reported that Prince Andrew and his multi-millionaire mate, the controversial property tycoon David Rowland, jointly owned a company in a secretive Caribbean tax haven that was to be used to cash in on the Duke's royal and political connections. And just think about that for a second. Prince Andrew, living a princely life, a HRH, has on so many levels abused the opportunity given to him. Any minister who behaved this way would be dismissed. Even an MP, if Mark, and God forbid Mark would never act this way, but if Mark Francois was to act this way, he'd be hauled in front of the Commons Standards Committee. Now, it really does, putting Prince Andrew to one side, it really does come to something when Prince Charles is seen as a beacon of hope for the royal family. The one-time scandal-ridden adulterer. He, whilst a student here at Cambridge, one of the world's greatest universities, sorry, Mr. President, the world's greatest university, the prince left this place with a 2-2 in anthropology, archaeology, and history. Now, this somehow, of course, leaves the prince believing he's an expert in all things. Over recent weeks, the future monarch has posed with Greta Thunberg and offered a 10-point plan for world leaders to save the planet. He delivered it from Davos, taking a £15,000 carbon-spewing flight on a private jet to get there, naturally. Now, I've no issue with the prince having views, but the House of Windsor can only succeed by exposing politicians as second-tier managers and reminding us that this country is much more than its government. It ultimately gives people reassurance that tomorrow will be recognisably much like today. The Prince of Wales, acting like a makeshift politician and not a future king, achieves quite the opposite of that. Now, I'll turn to the Sussexes next. They were denied their request to collaborate with the Queen on an ad hoc basis, speaking of the monarch like she's Nike or Nicki Minaj. Not only would their own status have been unclear, but a degree of institutional integrity would have been lost too. And whilst I really do believe that there's a massive amount of sympathy out there, and probably in here too, for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex and the position of the Duchess herself, that doesn't mean that all of their actions haven't undermined and threatened to destroy the sense of a mystical higher power that Walter Bagehot identifies in the English Constitution as being crucial to the magic of monarchy. And as the late Roger Scruton once said, constitutional monarchy is the light above politics, which shines down on the human bustle from a calmer and more exalted sphere. It's a light that's dimming, admittedly, but it's not altogether out. As Charles I discovered, on this day no less, in 1649, ultimately no king can govern save by the consent of his subjects. Royalty is not a private property, but a relationship. The popular disgust and anger, that was directed at the Sussexes' move to transfer their stock of royalty from public duty to that of private property is in truth anger at their privatising something which doesn't belong to them. It was an anger by the whole nation, actually. How can that be, Mr. President, seen as anything other than complete and utter failure? Now, of course, our royal families have been through tougher times than this, from glorious revolutions to outright regicide, which I'm not advocating today, by the way. And there are signs in the personage of the likes of William and Kate. The spirit of patriotism, custom, tradition, social stability, as well as non-engagement in partisan causes, suggests that these failures aren't terminal. But from reportedly cashing in on your princely status on official trade trips, cavorting with convicted paedophiles, highlighting your unelected nose by sticking it into highly partisan matters, or experimenting with turning the royal brand into a Kardashian-style empire, it's hard to argue that bar a few members of the royal household, the House of Windsor is, as it stands, Mr. President and ladies and gentlemen, failing across the board. And I really do hope that you'll support the proposition tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Darren, for that eloquent exposition of the proposition argument.